Good morning.
Good morning, Mr. Commissioner, members.
Yes.
Mr. Commissioner, we're ready. Dr. Surve is ready to proceed with his evidence. He can just perhaps be reminded that he's still under oath, and he requested me that he wants to make a correction to his statement before we start with the proceedings and the questioning.
Good morning, Dr. Iqbal.
Good morning, Mr. Commissioner. And
just to remind you that you are still under oath.
Yes, thank you, I am.
Thank you.
Mr. Commissioner, there was just one point in our statement, point number 96, which is that we had mentioned the transaction fees were paid by independent media to Weber Wenzel attorneys. That is in fact a correction. It was to ENS at the time. I think it was mentioned twice in the statement.
Yes, we've taken note of that.
Thank you, Mr. Commissioner. I will then continue with my questioning. I will try to wrap up what I have to ask by 10 o'clock to have enough time left for the Commission to ask any questions to Dr. Surve. Dr. Surve, before we start, can I make a deal with you that you will just answer the question I'm asking of you?
That is a good idea, Advocate Libber.
Thank you. All right. Now, is it correct that we have supplied your attorney with recordings of a meeting or two meetings that were held, and we also supplied you with a hard copy of a transcript of those meetings?
Correct.
You testified yesterday that Mr. Hardy was unwilling to make the call because he was going to be exposed. Is that correct? Do I remember your evidence correctly?
I ventured that correctly. Yeah.
Now, my instructions are, and on a objective reading of these transcripts and listening to the recordings, I put it to you and I want you to answer to that. Mr. Hardy was uncomfortable to make the call because you put pressure on him and other executives of AU to lie to the PIC.
That is incorrect.
He will further state, and it appears from the recording, that he did make the call, but Fidelis didn't answer.
From the recordings.
Then we go to the BT transaction. Is it correct that BT International requested you and the CEO of AEI, Mr. Khalid Abdullah, to resign last year?
The answer to that is there was a request for a change of directors as a result of all of the issues and the interrelated parties relating to IO and AEI, and I had indicated, in fact, to the BT head of global services that I wanted to come off the board of BT.
Thank you. Then what form did your initial investment in BT International take? Did you pay any money, Secundiala or any of your related companies? Did you pay any money?
Well, the BT transaction was what is called a vendor finance transaction that was done with the support of BT.
So would it be correct to say that you didn't pay money for your shares in BT International?
It is correct, but there is a greater context, but you've asked me to be short, so I will be short.
Was that also the form you took in other international investments made by Secundiala?
There are different models of funding the transactions, and in some cases we approached it from the point of view of own capital. some cases we approached it from the view of vendor financing. In some cases we approached it from the view of institutional funding.
You understand that? So the bottom line, if I can ask you that, is you made no payment, money payment for your shares into BT International, but with the AO transactions, you wanted the PIC to pay 1 billion rand for that stake. Is that correct?
That is correct, and here I have to elaborate. In the first instance, the transaction with BT at the time was when BT was getting its footprint into Southern Africa. That was about 8 to 10 years ago. And of course, BT wanted a far greater amount for their 30% equity stake. In fact, if I remember correctly, at the time, which was about 8 to 10 years ago, British Telecom, and again I'm subject to confidentiality, and I'm not quite sure that I'm able to say this because of the confidentiality with BT. So I'm a little bit concerned about that, but let me make this point though. The point I want to make is that the time of the investment in BT was 8 to 10 years ago. The business of BT had grown substantially since the time of the investment, and the valuation of the BT investment that AI had was in fact done by an independent JSE approved valuer, I think it's called Quest. So that was determined not by AI, not by IO, it was determined independently by a JSE approved valuer.
Thank you. I now turn to the IO transaction. And I want first of all to ask you, which other institutions did IO pitch to prior to the listing?
I would not have that information. You'd have to ask that of the IO and AI corporate finance team.
While we're on that score, and I want you to answer to this now, because I'm putting it to you that we will provide evidence to the effect that the IO and Sagamatha deals were done between you and Dr. Machilla.
That is incorrect. It's clear from the statement that there were several meetings between the executives of IO and the PIC, and between the executives of Sagamatha and the PIC.
Was the proposed listing of Sagamatha on an ongoing basis running parallel to the IO transaction?
I think there was overlap between the listings, yes.
I have an email, and it is dated 19 January 2018. It was sent by you to Dr. Machilla. It is 2 days before the listing of AO. It reads as follows: Dear Dan, please find enclosed attachments. Redwood indicated they had sent it to you directly, as this was an independent expert commissioned report. I am not sure which email they may have used to send you the report. Note that only 4 business sectors, 2 business out of 14, have been valued by Redwood. The other 10 will be valued in preparation for the New York Stock Exchange listing, etc. Best doc. And then the next day, on the same day, this is forwarded to Fidelis by Dr. Machilla. Please find attached evaluation conducted by an independent expert I asked Sequaniello to perform. Now what appears to me, and I want you to answer to that, what appears to me is that it was not the due diligence team or any other executive of the PIC requesting this valuation report by an independent expert. It was Dr. Machilla. And Dr. Machilla did not deal with the investment team of Sagamatha. He dealt directly with you.
I can't speak to your email. I haven't seen it before, but what I can say is that the valuation, let's go back to the beginning. Right. There is no corporate finance business in South Africa that can value MSP companies, multi-site platform. Let me continue.
We accept that, Doctor.
Oh, that's good, because that's very important.
But just speak to this email then, please.
I am speaking to this email, Advocate Lubbe. But if I can't provide context, Mr. Commissioner, it's very difficult. Because the reality is, Advocate Lubbe has accepted that there is no corporate finance entity in South Africa that is able to value multi-site platform companies such as Sagamata, Uber, Airbnb, etc. It was important, firstly, for the listing on the JSE, and secondly, for international listing, to get a international valuation company that is experienced in valuing multi-sided platform companies. And Redwood Capital Partners is one of those companies. It is based, I think, in San Francisco, and it has valued upwards of, I think, 500 companies, including Snap, Facebook, WhatsApp, etc. And it was important to be able to have an international valuation for the business. And so it was in that context that the Redwood valuation was done.
I accept that. All I'm asking you is, it appears from this email, which I've shown to you now, it appears that Dr. Machilla requested this evaluation, not his team, not his board. Dr. Machilla did that. He forwarded it to you personally, not to your team, not to the board of AU, to you. Now, I'm asking you, why is that, if you are not involved in these transactions?
Sorry, so just to be clear, you have mixed up IO and Sagamata here. This has nothing to do with IO.
I understand that.
You accept that?
But let's just talk then. You said you also had nothing to do with Sagamata.
No, but you've just said it's IO and Sagamata.
Well, I correct myself then.
Thank you. This is to do with Sagamata.
Why would he then send it to you if you are not on the board and had nothing to do with the Sagamata listing?
I mentioned yesterday in the testimony that I was called in by my colleagues to explain the valuation of multi-sided platform companies to the PIC. And there is no question, Advocate Lubbe, that I am the one person that understands the valuation of multi-sided platform companies. And I also understand the entities globally that would value these entities. And for that reason, I was involved in the Sagamata component of it.
I understand that. Now, if we can get back to AO.
No, sorry, before you move off that, if you don't mind, I think in the documents there's just, as you've referred to Redwood and its valuations, I would just like to perhaps ask Dr. Surve. There are two, if you take the letter of the 17th of January, states that it's the purpose of estimating fair market value for two specific business units, namely Loot and Anna, and that was valued at Anna business unit at round figures $1.4 billion and Loot business unit at $1.8 billion. And then it goes on to say that the reports are based upon the information provided to Redwood by the company, so that would be the basis on which they would assess that. And the attached exhibits and calculations of fair market value do not constitute a fairness opinion and should not be relied upon for the purpose of investment. Would you accept that that was the position taken by Redwood in communication to the PIC?
That is the standard position taken by entities that value technology companies, and I think most companies in any event. Yeah, that's a standard position.
Thank you, Mr. Commissioner. To you. Dr. Surve, then to get back to AO. Why would Dr. Dan and Fidelis call you and demand an answer on BT if you're not involved? Why didn't they contact your team?
Advocate Lubbe, I was the one that called them.
Address yourself to me, otherwise
Sorry,
there might be some argument between the two of you.
Called them. I mentioned that yesterday as well. It was not them. They might have called me back, but I was the one that initiated the call.
Well, If you're not part of this transaction, why do you call them?
Mr. Commissioner, I explained. I am chairman of this group overall, of the second Jala group. These are material investments. The PIC is a very material investor in IO itself. When the SENS announcement was made the day before, in terms of the BT transaction, and when the CEO of AI called me to discuss the fact that Mr. Hardy had informed him that the PIC was not willing to proceed with the BT transaction, that was of grave concern to me. And I needed to get clarification on that point. And I saw nothing wrong as being the chairman of this group overall, even though I'm not a board member of IO, to call either Dr. Machila or Fidelis and to get clarification whether this in fact was the position of the PIC, because I didn't understand that, if that was the position. And secondly, if Mr. Hardy was in fact being dishonest or whether he was simply doing his own thing, it was important to establish that point. And that's the reason why I called. And I don't see any reason why I cannot make such a call. It's not unusual for someone in my position as the chairman of a large group that has made several investments to call asset managers, institutions, banks and others in order to establish the facts. And that's exactly what I did.
Sorry, according to the typed version of the recorded meeting on page 19, and I read to you, and that is you speaking, and I think he was sitting with his exco and his guys, you know, and then Fidelis started calling me. Fidelis started texting me. That is the recording.
Advocate Lubbe, Mr. Commissioner, sorry. Take me a while to get used to that. First of all, if I may say this, the recordings and transcripts that you've provided are jumbled up. They do not make any sense. They read as if they are one meeting and one recording. Yes, it is correct that you have provided the voice recordings, but if I look at these transcripts that your office kindly provided to us, they present themselves as one meeting and one recording. This is clearly not the case. That's the first point I'd like to make. In relation to that point, Mr. Commissioner, there are 3 meetings that I can ascertain from the recordings, and the transcripts are presented in such a way that they are presented as one meeting, or one continuous meeting, I should add. The first meeting is a meeting of the Board of IO. I was not present at that meeting. I'd indicated yesterday I was in fact at a meeting with Jack Ma.
Sorry, can I interrupt you there? We fully agree with that. It is clear from the recording that you were not at the board meeting, and you joined them after they concluded the board meeting. That is clear from the recording.
So I'm making the point that there are 3 specific recordings or meetings here. The first meeting until, I think it's 25, I think it is, page 25. I have absolutely nothing to do with that meeting. And so I'm not quite sure of the relevance of that point. The second point is, after the board meeting, the chairman of IO and a few of the executives and some other individuals, I think, stayed behind, and that recording is the recording, which I want to also add. These recordings were unlawful and unethical, and it's really disgraceful that executives can do this. But the second recording is a recording that I entered part of the meeting, and I'm not sure exactly from which page it is, but I think it
Well,
could
let me read it to you again. It's on page 19. Look at the top of the page, the third line, and I'm going to read it to you, if you have the page.
Yes,
Third
yes.
line, and I think he was sitting with his exco and his guys, you know, and then Fidelis started calling me. Fidelis started texting
Is
me.
this page 19 or what
19,
page?
19,
90.
19.
I don't think I was present in that meeting.
Well, let me,
page 19.
I'll
The
read
first
it.
25 pages I was not present.
Page 19 reads, and I think he was sitting with his exco and his guys, you know, and then Fidelis started calling me, and then I had to go back. I can't got to go back in. I have got to go back in. The bottom line is that we ended up, all of us are saying, okay, I'm going to come here and get you guys to pick up the phone, speak to Fidelis, give him the explanation as to what is going on, because they have got the investment. I do think you need to speak to them. That is important. Isn't that you speaking there?
Well, I'm on page 19, and I don't see, well, you have a different page 19 to me.
There are 2 volumes.
Oh, right, okay. So there's a second
Yes.
point.
It's 19 of 25.
That's correct.
The 19 of 25 isn't there. Maybe he's talking of 19 of 43.
Yeah, 19 of 43.
Okay, here we go. Right. Previous page. Yeah, okay. Can you just refer to
The 3rd line from the top, and I think it starts with that. If you can just take your time and read it and tell the Commission, is that you speaking?
Yeah, it's possible. Yeah, this is, I think, me speaking.
Thank you.
It's not clear in your transcript, of course. So, and in your transcript, I have to point out, Mr. Commissioner, that there are names or given to certain people, and if I listen to the voice recording, it's not the same. So, whoever made this transcript has allocated names to different people in terms of the voice recording and what's in the transcript itself.
But
So-
if I can then ask you, from your recollection, your memory, did you say that at the meeting with Hardy and the other executives when you entered the meeting?
Yes, I did, and I do not I do not apologize for that because I was establishing the facts, and there's
the
nothing
facts,
wrong with that.
the facts as stated by you is that Fidelis started calling you, texting you.
No, I had made it clear, I think early on in the meeting, that Mr. Abdullah had called me, that I had called both Fidelis and Dr. Machila, and I tried to get hold of someone else, I can't remember. They called me back. Fidelis texted me. In terms of the BT transaction, there was also a SENS announcement. And I was trying to establish the facts. And if you listen carefully to this recording, I'm actually protecting the interest of the PIC. That's what I'm doing.
Can I just get clarity on this? When it is asked whether you were at the meeting, is it meant that you'd phoned in to a meeting that was sitting, or you were actually there personally?
No, it was an informal meeting, Mr. Commissioner, and they were meeting, they had finished their board meeting. There were about 5 executives there, and they were discussing various items. I had come across and I joined that board meeting, and I conveyed to them at the board meeting the discussions which I had with both Mr. Fidelis Madavu and Dr. Dan Machila in relation to the PIC's position on the BT transaction, because Mr. Hardy had indicated that Victor Siani had informed him that the PIC did not wish to do the BT transaction, and in fact, Mr. Hardy himself did not want to do the BT transaction, as is evident from this transcript or voice recording towards the end, because I was trying to establish, is Mr. Hardy, I gave him the benefit of the doubt, is Mr. Hardy lying? Is he telling the truth? If he's telling the truth, there's no reason why he should not be able to call the PIC in my presence. And I, in fact, made the point, don't tell the PIC I'm here, because I want to hear, are different things being said to him, or are different things being said to me in terms of the PIC's position on BT? Because we were getting conflicting views on the BT transaction. This is
Yes,
what...
I think we got that evidence yesterday.
Thank you.
Just to put it on record, and if necessary, we'll recall witnesses, it was never the position of the PIC that they're not interested in the BT transaction. Your version is different, is that correct?
Well, we can only go by on what Advocate Wallace Gorky has said, what the chairman of IO has said, and various other people have said in relation to the PIC's position, and we will maintain that the PIC, in fact, had a change of heart about the BT transaction, and this was largely due to the media exposure, and the suggestion wrongly that the funds that IO was going to pay AEI were in fact going to Sekunjalo to settle independent media or to my family trust. This was of course baseless. And the second thing is that there was a question of valuation of the BT transaction, and we will maintain that in fact it is the PIC itself that sabotaged the BT transaction by its conduct and its actions.
Mr. Commissioner, I'm running out of time. I was hoping to finish in half an hour. I've got 2 or 3 more questions, and then I'm going to hand over to the Commission. And if there's time left, I will, and if it's necessary, we'll have to ask Dr. Surve to come back. But if you will grant me just a couple of minutes more to complete some of my questions. There's an interesting thing I want you to explain to the Commission, Dr. Surve, is that very shortly before listing, you changed jockeys. You replaced PSG with Vuyani, and you replaced your lawyers, Weber Wenzel, with other lawyers that I can't remember now. Is that correct?
In what matter? In which transaction?
TGR, that is the listing for IO. Thank you, Mr. Commissioner.
Commissioner, you'd have to ask that question of the AI corporate finance team. I'm not aware that, who did you say was replaced?
The PSG, and Weber Wenzel.
I don't think that's true. From what I've seen on the PLS, PSG is there, Weber Wenzel is there. Of course, the support of supporting black transaction houses such as Vunani Capital and supporting TGR, which is a black law firm, there's no problem to do that. So as far as I'm aware, and my recollection of the PLS of IO, all of them were there. Can you check that?
We will check that. I don't want to give you the incorrect information. Then, did you invest in Vuyani? Any of your entities, did you invest in Vuyani?
Mr. Commissioner, I'm assuming the question is, did IO invest in Vunani Capital?
I don't know whether that's the question, but Mr.
Any
Lever,
of you,
can you clear
thank
that?
you, Mr. Commissioner. Any of your entities, IO or any of your entities?
Advocate Lubber, through you, Mr. Commissioner. I'm just making sure we're talking about the same company. The entity that I think IO, which is in the document presented to the Commission, is Vunani Capital, not Vuyani Capital. Yes, it is clear that IO has invested in Vunani Capital, and it is clear from the statements made by the IO executives and what is in the media is that the investment is to support a black enterprise in order to bring in black ICT entrepreneurs into the ecosystem of IO, and Vunani Capital would in fact make that particular sort of due diligence of black ICT businesses. And so yes, an IO made that investment into, it's in the documentation in any event. And again, why not? You know, it's a black business, and why can we not support it?
Thank you. My last question. Is it correct that at the time of the listing of AO, that is, we're talking now January 2018, the market capitalization of AEEI was about 3 billion. Billion, would you agree?
I have not checked, but I'm going to accept Mr. Commissioner Advocate Lubber's information.
The point I'm making, and I want you to comment on that, at that valuation, PIC could have bought the whole of AEEI for that amount. And this would have given the PIC ownership not only of AEEI's 80% stake in AO, but also its 30% stake in BTSA, held through its subsidiary, Kilomax, for 3 billion. And AEI also held some other investments which had value. Instead, the PIC paid 4.3 billion for 29% of AO, which valued AO at some 14 billion. Can you suggest any reason why they would do that?
Commissioner, first of all, the pre-money valuation of IO, if you look at the PLS, was in fact 11 billion. The second point is that the IO valuation, as was indicated at this commission by senior portfolio managers and analysts from the PIC, was a base case of 43. In fact, I was wrong yesterday. I said a base case of 43. According to the transcript, which I reread again, from a very senior executive in the portfolio committee, the general manager of, I think it's consumer or retail or something, plus the general manager of listed equities, plus the head of listed equities, they have indicated their base case was 45 Rand and that the high-end case was 47 Rand. The modeling that they followed in terms of the IO transaction was clearly correct because IO had come to a pre-money valuation of 43 Rand. So it took it to 11 billion. So that's the first part of my answer. The second part of my answer is that if you look at the share price of AEI at the time, and if you look, for instance, at the value of the investments of AEI, I don't remember the specific period and the time. I'd have to go and look into that. But the value, there was a huge discount between the market, or to use a term which is in fact commonly used in the financial services sector, the intrinsic market value. Lots of companies produce results based on this, and they talk about the intrinsic market value of the investments. If I'm not wrong, the intrinsic market value at the time of AEI was in the region of about 6 billion, and the market capitalization was 3 billion. It's not unusual for the market capitalization of a company to be well below its market value. Sometimes it's calculated on the back of NAV, sometimes it is calculated on the back of market value and the back of equity investments, etc. I'm very happy, I don't want to waste the Commission's time, but I can also give you an example. For instance, if you take Walmart in the USA, Walmart has 250,000 employees. Walmart has 3 times the revenue of Amazon. Walmart's market capitalization is 1/3 of that of Amazon. Amazon is $1 trillion company. Walmart has been around for a very long time. So when you're talking about valuations in relation to, and yes, the other point is, if the PIC had tried to purchase those shares in AEI, I doubt they would have gotten the shares at that price. They would probably, Mr. Commissioner, had to pay, if they had to invest it in AEI, probably in my view, to bring AEI to a market capitalization of 15 billion. I'll tell you why, because as far as I'm aware, none of the major shareholders of AEI were going to sell their shares. I certainly was not prepared to sell my shares. The other institutions, the other investors may not be prepared to sell the shares. All of them have superb, the high net worth individuals that have invested in AEI have superb confidence in the management team of AEI and the board of the AEI. So it's unlikely for the PIC to be able to get an entry point in AEI, because who's going to sell the shares? As far as the investors of AEI are concerned, it's a company that could reach 20 billion over the next 5 to 7 years in market capitalization. Why should they give up their shareholding so early on?
That concludes my part this morning, and I'm sorry, I apologize for overrunning by 5 minutes. I just want to make one correction. Dr. Surve, I put it to you that PSG was replaced with the IO transaction. It's not correct. But the Weber's law firm was replaced by TGR. And in the Sagamartha transaction, Vundani Capital was then the sponsor instead of PSG. I just wanted to correct that.
Mr. Commissioner, if my memory serves me correct, and I've just been given the good part of the PLS now, Webers are still on the PLS. So it's not that they were necessarily replaced, that both them and TGR, which is the black law firm, and this is our, from the inception, if I may just say so, from the inception of the second Jala Group, I've always insisted that where they are established and experienced companies, that they should be accompanied by an emerging company. I don't want to use the term black, but an emerging company or advisor, so that the emerging company advisor gets the experience. And at our very first listing, by the way, just to tell you this, in May 99, when African Equity Empowerment Investments was called Second Jala Investments Limited, not to be confused with Second Jala Holdings, I went out of my way to make sure that a number of black law firms and other entities and advisors worked alongside established corporates to allow them to get entry into the listing space. So we were the first company actually to provide that, really the first, I'm not kidding, the first to actually provide that entry point for black advisors and black professionals to participate in a listing. And so that remains the philosophy.
Thank you. Thank you, Dr. Surve. We almost kept to our deal, but thank you.
Yes, thank you.
Thank you very much. And perhaps at the outset, just to emphasize the purpose of our being here is, as a commission, has been set up to look into whether there were any, to investigate the allegations of impropriety on the part of the PIC. That is the purpose of the investigation. It is not to investigate your companies. It's to see the role of the PIC in relation to its investments, and that is the core business of this commission, including then making recommendations to the President about governance, about the practices, about what has been done. It is within that context that the questions take place. It does then help us to get a better picture of one of the counterparties, which is yourself as the entirety of the second Jala Group and all of the companies involved in that. So I'd like to perhaps start with the question of boards and the boards that you serve on. How many boards do you serve on? I don't need the names, but just the number in total, because on page 3, paragraph 5, you indicate you serve on many of the company's boards. How many boards do you serve on, whether they are your own companies or companies in which there is a stake or an interest?
I cannot give you the exact number, but what I can tell you is that a few years ago, when I was much younger and had lots more energy, I served on many boards, but subsequently, the last 5 years, I think it is, I decided to step off most of the boards that I was on, especially public company boards. I sat on other public company boards as well outside the second Jala Group, and I've only retained the main chairmanship of the main holding company as well as the multinational boards. But I can't, but of course besides that I sit on other boards such as World Economic Forum boards and other multilateral. I was chairman of the BRICS Business Council, as you may be aware. So I would say a lot of my time is taken by my participation in multilateral institutions, and so those are the boards that I really serve on. The operating boards of the companies, the boards of directors, the executive management, my colleagues and I collectively make a decision in terms of the appointment to those boards where we have a say.
I think it would be helpful if we can just get the number. It doesn't matter whether, you can differentiate between whether they are corporate boards or not, but I think it would be useful because it gives an indication of time availability in terms of being an executive chair of Sekunjalo, and it would just give us some sense of your time allocation at this point in time, not historically, of how many boards you actually serve on now. And you can differentiate between the BRICS boards or whatever, which are different kinds of boards, to where you have a fiduciary duty in terms of those companies, and perhaps you can provide that to the evidence leader.
Mr. Commissioner, very happy to provide that.
I would then like to ask you about, sorry, I'm just going through your statement. I then wanted to move to this discussion on Sagarmatha, if I could. And I think that this is, sorry? Okay, yeah, sure.
I got a couple of broad questions before we go to the companies, yeah? All right. Dr. Surve, when you look at the amount which you have raised, you know, from the PIC or tried to raise, when you tally it up, it's about, say, 9.2 billion rand or so. So there's the 4.3 billion from IO, and there's the purported, you know, the 3 billion which you wanted to raise, you know, from, you know, for Sagarmatha, which is 7.3 billion. I just wanted to check on Premier Fishing. Did you raise the 500 million?
Yes, through you, Mr. Commissioner.
Yes.
The capital raising for Premier Fishing was approximately 500 million.
Mm-hmm.
The PIC, I think, contributed part of that capital raising in the region of about 200 million, I think. And I also want to add at the same time, there was a similar listing of Sea Harvest, which is a subsidiary of Brimstone, and the PIC investment in that listing was substantially greater than their investment into Premier Fishing.
Okay.
So it was consistent with their policy of investment.
All right. Okay. Yeah. Thanks. Say 200 million. And then on the independent media, we're looking at about 1.3 billion or so, because it was the subordinated loans, debentures and all that. Yeah? Come again.
That is not correct. You, specifically through you, Mr. Commissioner,
Yes.
you are referring to the investment of the PIC in independent media.
Mm-hmm.
So the independent media, and I'm saying PIC as opposed to everyone else.
Yes.
In independent media, in 2013, the PIC had invested on day one of the transaction 1 billion, which was then paid to the Irish as part of the 2 billion acquisition price, just a little bit over 2 billion. The Sekunjalo Consortium, not to be confused with Sekunjalo Holdings, the Sekunjalo Consortium is a consortium of a number of trade unions, black empowerment groupings and other groupings together, which own 55% of independent media, then paid the PIC immediately 150 million. So the PIC's exposure in 2013 was in fact 850 million, which is a combination, 25% of that was the equity contribution, and the remained equity out of the total equity, and the remainder of that was debt. If I may just say one point, if you allow me, Mr. Commissioner, the PIC has invested 7 billion in TISO Black Star. That today is worth 200 million.
Yeah, let's stop there. Yeah. All right. So the main point, I mean, besides the numbers, we can get the correct numbers. The main point is that within 3 to 4 years, the PIC is sort of putting about 8 to 9 billion in your companies in about 4 transactions, or 3 transactions with supposed to be 4 with the Sagarmatha. Don't you think that kind of a thing will make people think that, look, the PIC is like favoring you? Do you have comments on that?
I've got to look at that in the context of the size of our group. Mm-hmm. So if you look at the size of our group, for instance, it's a very large group. Mm-hmm. It is one of the largest corporates in the country. Mm-hmm. But for comparative example, the actual numbers that the PIC has invested in our group over the last, I would say, 6 or 7 years is in the region, that's an investment for the PIC, it's probably in the region of about 5.5 billion. But if you take Steinhoff, for example, it took the PIC, from my understanding, 2 days to invest, to augment their existing 16 billion investment in Steinhoff with another 9.3 billion. So I don't want to compare Steinhoff. I mean, that's a completely different kettle of fish. However, it's not unusual. The key thing is not how much you invest. The key thing is that, is it a good investment? Will it be a good investment over time? Do you have good management teams? Do you have a good strategy? Can it actually work? So I don't think that the amount that the PIC is invested, and of course I did make a point yesterday that I would like the PIC to invest a lot more in other black groups in the country. And as one particular point I want to make, the reason not taking place in the listed space is because it's very expensive, very time-consuming, and you need to go through a very rigorous process in order to list a company. And many black companies, unfortunately, can't afford. Look, it's cost us, tens of millions in each case. In the case of IO and Sagamata, it's cost us 80 million to prepare for the listing. So the challenge that black companies have is that, first of all, they need a track record of experience, track record of profitability. Secondly, they need to have the funds available in the event that a listing doesn't happen. They would have expended huge amounts of money to advisors, etc.
Thanks, thanks. To follow up then is that, you see, the concern is that your companies haven't proven to be success, coming into IO and Sagamata. So the independent media, like, has had problems, as we know. And you came and asked for more money, and so far the PIC has lost money on all the companies. I mean, the independent media, IO, they've lost more than 2 billion rands now, and then there were, and the other companies. So it's a different matter that, one of your companies is not doing well, but you still ask for more money. To invest.
Through you, Mr. Commissioner, this is unfortunately not correct. The PIC has not lost any money on IO. It is correct that the share price of IO is what it is today, but when the PIC or Sub-C makes a statement that the company has to pay back the money, who's going to buy the share? Everyone's going to sell the share, and it's quite normal for the share price to go down. However, let's look at the fundamentals of the company. I did manage now to go and look at the results that came out, I think it was on Monday afternoon. The performance of IO is exceptional. So if you extrapolate that performance to a full year performance, you're looking at revenue for this year of about 2 billion, and you're looking at profitability heading towards 700 million. That is in spite of all the negativity. If you put a multiple on that, you'd get to a multiple of about 15 billion. And if you give it a year later, you're looking at IO, once they deploy the capital, having a profitability in the region of 1.2, 1.3 billion. If you take a PE multiple, according to the PIC's own multiples, 16 times to 30 times, if you look at EOH, Adapt IT, Dimension Data historically, etc. This IO share price, if the PIC supports its own investment in IO, should reach 100 Rand within the space of 3 years, which means that the PIC would in fact almost triple its investments within a 5-year period. And I think that is superb. So what one must look at, we build industrial economies. We take long-term view of our investments, and that's what we're doing. So as a chairman of this group, no one is in here for a quick buck. What you are trying to do is build the South African economy. You're trying to invest and create employment, but at the same time demand excellence from your management teams and boards. And I'm extremely confident that IO will, its market capitalization will reach 30 to 50 billion within the next 3 to 5 years. And the PIC will have made a superb investment. Let's give the management team an opportunity to deploy the capital. And let's give them, and the one more thing I want to say, if you take all the other companies, they all have significant debt. Even if you take a company like MTN and Aspen Aspen's debt is greater than its market capitalization. Came down from 400 Rand a share to about, I think it is about 90 Rand a share. MTN came from 220 a share down. It doesn't mean they're bad companies. IO has the one advantage, it doesn't have debt.
Okay, all right, thanks. And then,
Sorry, Mr. Commissioner, I'm sorry to interrupt you. Just for the record and to make sure that we all understand that the financial statements that you refer to that was released on Monday, they are an unaudited financial statement. Is that correct?
Mr. Commissioner, they are unaudited, but they are regulated. It is part of the JSE regulation. In our history, in our group, I mean, we have a track record of sound governance of our public companies, and you can extrapolate quite easily from the 6 months, because those are the 6 months statements. And normally all JSE companies, in almost all instances, I can't think of one that's not the case, have only their full year audited. But I have no reason to believe, based on the profitability, the operating profits of the business, based on the acquisition pipeline, and if I had to extrapolate from the data which is publicly available, the profitability of IO in this very difficult environment would in fact reach probably 600-700 million for this year.
thanks. Yeah, okay, thanks. And the performance of the sort of Premier Fishing and the independent media, because I understand the independent media is suffering losses, 22 million rands in the EBITDA loss.
Mr. Commissioner, through you, you are correct. Independent media, like all media houses globally, at the time when we did this transaction, we had Citibank advising us. The Irish wanted more than 4 billion for it. We ended up paying 2 billion. There were many companies that wanted to acquire it. At that point in time, including our main English-speaking media competitor, TSO Blackstar, its share price was in the region of about 26 Rand. Before that, when Velapanda bought in, it was 48 Rand. Before that, when Cyril Ramaphosa led the NEC grouping to buy into what was then the Times Media, it was 60 Rand. Today, TSO Blackstar's share price is 3.50 Rand. The market capitalization is 900 million. The PIC owned directly at least 22% in TSO what is today TSO Blackstar, previously called Avusa and TMG, directly, and another, I think, 11% through Kagiso Asset Management. If you extrapolate the market capitalization, just taking 5 years ago, not even going back to the time of Velapanda or President Cyril Ramaphosa when he headed the NEC investment into them, at that time, the market capitalization, according to my calculation, was probably in the region of about 8 billion or so of TSO Blackstar. Today, the market cap, so the PIC owning 25% of that market capitalization has lost 2 billion Rand in TSO Blackstar. But I don't blame TSO Blackstar's management for that. The reality is that there has been a structural change in the media industry from the time that all of us invested, the digitalization of the media industry. And that is why Sagamata was such a great investment for the PIC, because for the first time you could take a legacy print media business.
Oh, thank you. All right. So let's move to another point.
Oh, yes. If you, sorry, Mr. Commissioner, through you, if you look at the results of the fishing business, you'll see it's exceptionally profitable. No debt, high cash flows, and the audited numbers for 2018 shows exceptional performance. So again, and I think the results will come out shortly. I know they have a 6 months, results coming out, and I expect their numbers to be exceptional based again on the overall, market conditions. So
I don't want to belabor the issue, but I've noted that the share price is sort of 60% of what it was.
Share price is a function of many things. The overall South African economy has gone into a recession. The JSE's overall indices is down significantly. Company share prices are trashed. If you had bought Aspen at 400 Rand about 2 years ago, it's sitting at 80. MTN, I mean, I can go EOH, Tongaat, Hewlett, all the blue chip companies that you acquired. Unfortunately, share price is a function of many factors. What one has to look at through you, Commissioner, is the fundamentals of the business. Is it profitable? Is it doing well? Are there strong cash flows? Does it have any risk in debt? And you know, in all of our businesses, we have no debt, except for independent
No, it's
media.
fine, it's fine.
Okay.
So you are saying it's the market, the general market, okay? All right. In terms of key man risk, concentration risk, I mean, the PIC has put in a lot of money in your businesses, and you are a big figure within your companies. This exposure, I mean, what can happen to you if you fall under the bus, you know, as people say?
Through you, Commissioner, you know, this is so unfair to my colleagues. I must tell you, I'm the least important person in our organization. I really am. My colleagues, and in particular the talent that we have, both black and white in our group, is exceptional. They are superb boards, superb management teams across the board. I blame no decision in those businesses. The performance of example, just to give an example, Premier Fishing, I have absolutely nothing to do with the exceptional. And this is unfortunate because their excellence is clouded by the fact that I have bought independent media and in so doing become controversial for that. It's not fair to the thousands of people who work for our group who are really excellent at what they do. Maybe I provide a bit of the vision and I provide the mission, which is about caring for our country and putting back our money and growing our economy. But that is my role. And of course, internationally, the fact is that sometimes people joke that I'm more well-known internationally than in South Africa. And yes, I do bring the international networks, but my colleagues, they run the businesses and they are superb. And they manage it far better than I ever could. I must tell you that. Credit is given to me when it should never be given to me.
All right, next one. Some of the questions which came through in the testimonies here is about, you know, the PIC has suffered reputational damage in terms of political independence, sort of the politicians wanting funding and all that, and the political, you know, problems. So when we look at your companies, I mean, you got trade unions there, you got big people in the political sphere, and the PIC has had a PEP policy, you know. And don't you think, I mean, looking at your transaction, I think it was your transaction, you sort of wrote, you asked people to write letters to the PIC to encourage the PIC to fund the company. Don't you think that putting political pressure on the PIC, like it's a problem because that puts the PIC's name in danger? The reputational damage.
You may be referring to Sagamata, not I.
Yes, probably that, yeah.
Sagamata.
Undue pressure on the PIC.
My philosophy, simply put, is that I'd like to empower as many people as possible, including the workers of this country, and hence the participation of trade unions. I have met numerous times with a number of trade union leaders to talk about the vision of creating an African digital economy where Africans take control of their data and the economy. And so we create jobs. Trade unions are important in terms of creating jobs. And through all of our companies, we've built social contracts with trade unions. It's such an important part. Maybe it's a little bit about my background in terms of believing in a stakeholder capitalism, inclusive capitalism. On that basis, I think people really want to participate in our businesses. And of course, if they write letters to the PIC, that's okay. However, my advice would be, if I may say this to the PIC, because that's the context of the question, is that you should ignore that. You should much rather look at the fundamentals of the business that is being invested into. You should look at whether it meets stakeholder requirements, including commercial returns to pensioners and taxpayers. You should look at whether it serves the purpose of transformation in the economy. You should look at whether it unlocks monopolies within our economy, etc. So my advice, but you know, I don't think the PIC takes these kind of things seriously. I do think you need, if I may say so, listening and reading the transcripts, far more people on the PIC board that are smart about, understanding the capital markets and the requirement of the capital markets to grow our economy, unlocking the balance sheets of companies that have got R1 trillion in investment, and utilizing that smartly in partnership with entrepreneurs. And I think we need to get to the stage as South Africans where we move beyond simply just distributing wealth between ourselves. We need to get to the point where we create wealth and we grow our economy. And I think the PIC can play that very important role, but it must do so with transformation being a critical component, but real transformation, really supporting entrepreneurs that want to get on with the job of growing the country, running businesses, and also taking, my organization, I tell people I'm only going to be successful as an entrepreneur if the organization exists 20 years after I leave.
Thank you. Then the last question from this section before we move to companies. I just wanted to check the battle between you and Tiso Blackstar and the others, and I'm asking it from the point of view of the PIC. Was there no meeting between the PIC and you, the two companies, for a peace deal at some point in time, that you guys, you need to make peace since the PIC has invested in both companies? What was the outcome of that meeting?
Yes, that is correct. I don't think a war situation between media houses is good for anybody, especially when you're dealing with the lives of people that are employed by both companies. But there are fundamental differences in terms of such what you would call a merger. The first issue is the issue of diversification of the narrative in the economy. The second issue is that our company happens to be predominantly black at its leadership level, and a lot of women at the leadership level. The third is that when I did have a discussion with Mr. Bonnemore at the time, when he initially approached me to actually merge the entities, his version was that, and he can of course deny this, but he did say to me at the Maslow Hotel that we should merge the entities, retrench half the people of the combined entities. We would then have a profitability of about 250 million combined in the media assets. My view was that, retrenching people in South Africa at this point in time with families, and I have 1,500 people, predominantly black people who have bought into the vision and philosophy and aspirations. I could not do that. I'd rather put in money from Sekunjalo, which I do every month to support independent media, because I'm keeping people employed. But there's the other issue of the narrative of this country. We've not taken sides politically. We've in fact given all points of view, and we provided a balanced narrative. So philosophically, they have a very different outlook to independent media. And yes, if you look at it pure commercially as a ruthless capitalist, but unfortunately I'm not one of those. But if you were a ruthless capitalist, you'd merge the entities, retrench half the workers, keep the brands, maybe shut down one or two brands, combine digital publications, and your profitability will definitely, for both companies, will increase. But is that in the interest of our country? I don't think so.
So the peace deal never happened?
Well, it doesn't happen because what Tiso Blackstar has done is they have made me the face of the campaign. They've defamed me. They've lied about me repeatedly. They've said things.
Let's leave it there. Yeah, let's leave it there. All right. Yeah. So I'm done with my first part, and then I think.
Thank you.
Commissioner Marcus.
Thank you very much. I think just arising from what this discussion so far has been led by my colleague, I think, Advocate Libba, it would be very useful, because what picture I would like to see is the extent of the PIC engagement with the entirety of that group, so that we know what the total exposure is. And again, there seems to be quite a number of interrelated, the question of related party activities. So I'd like to see a diagram, a schematic of this is the entire group, this is the interrelated activities, because otherwise it's very easy to look at one and meantime you mean the other one. Are there flows of money between them? You've just indicated Sekunjalo supporting the fishery. And therefore, from our perspective as the Commission, what is the total exposure of the PIC to every entity within that group, and a schematic flow of funds that flow either from the PIC to different entities or between entities. And I think that would help us get a better picture of what the PIC's exposure is in total.
It is noted through you, Mr. Commissioner.
Perhaps the Secretarial team can assist in providing that. I think it would be very useful for the work of the Commission. If I could go back to the question that arose around Sagamata. And I think it is, there's a number of questions that arise for me from this, not whether it was listed and what happened in the listing, but the run-up to that. From my reading of it, it indicates that there was a requirement or a goal of 3 billion rand that would be raised from the PIC. And I'm looking at an email, and obviously there were differences in pricing, and you've indicated definitely from your side the valuation that you would follow. It's 39 rand something. That was to give you the 3 billion, and the PIC team was at 7 rand 50. And I'd like to read an email to you, which is from Dr. Machila to his own team. And it says, dear colleagues, and obviously he's engaging with you or the person represented by you in this matter. I've assumed that it is you, but if it's not you, please indicate who it was. We have been able to move closer to our base case being the 7 rand 50. The deal now is to subscribe for shares worth 3 billion at the proposed listing price, that is 39 rand plus, and also to get full downside. Sagamata will provide us with a 1 rand strike call option on a number of shares that gives us an average price of 8 rand 50 per share price exercisable on the day of listing. This will put our shareholding at about 32%. If the price of 39.9 holds, then our value will be quite significant. Please prepare a submission on this basis. We'll firm up the numbers as soon as a letter is received from Sagamata. The question I'm asking is that if I am not the PIC investing and I buy shares as an investor at 39.9 rand per share, and there is a side agreement that actually will reduce the price of that share to 8 rand 50, issuing more shares to the PIC, what are the implications for me as a non-PIC investor? And obviously it changes the holding of the PIC. But is that something that was disclosed to, or would have been disclosed to all investors, that there was a side agreement that the price would actually go down to 8 rand 50?
That is not correct. So these are suggestions that the PIC made to us close to the Sagamata listing. That is not what happened. What was in fact taking place is that the JSE listing was going ahead because the commitments were received to meet the minimum capital requirement, excluding the PIC. That's the first point. Dr. Machila and his team probably saw the benefits of this. What I was prepared to do, because I thought it's an important opportunity for the PIC to benefit from this investment, and they would really make a good return on the investment, was that I was prepared to underwrite their investment in Sagamata and to show them the confidence which I had. So I was prepared to put the balance sheet of the Secondjalo group on the table and said to them, look, you have to pay your 39 rand a share like every other investor because you can't do that selectively. Their suggestion was to come up with all sorts of various things at the time. My view was you pay your 39 rand, I will underwrite the listing for you in full so that if the share price of this listing falls by the time, I was confident that 6 to 9 months after we list on the JSE, we would go to New York because I'd already gone to New York with my team, met with the New York Stock Exchange. We got in principle approval to list on the New York Stock Exchange at a much greater market capitalization than what we were listing on the JSE. And I was confident that I could underwrite the listing for them. I also want to remind you that even at 7 or 8 rand 50, the market capitalization of Sagamata is 8 billion. So it's not small. This is a very significant investment. And again, I want to remind you that we had two international valuations. One is by Redwood Capital Partners, and the other one is the University of Columbia, who finance faculty for our audit committee, that provided detailed. It is not just, Mr. Commissioner, through you, I want to tell you, this is not a simple thing that the company provides the information. It is not how it works. You're not going to find Redwood or the University of Columbia simply putting together a valuation of this nature very quickly. It takes literally weeks to be able to do this. It requires many meetings or conference calls.
I appreciate that. I'm asking the question of differentiation around the price, and that was clearly documented by Dr. Machila as the deal that would have gone
that
forward.
Was his suggestion. That's not what
That's fine,
Sagamata would have accepted.
That's the answer that's on the record, is that it was his suggestion. But
He
what
probably
I'm saying,
thought he was acting in the best interest of the PIC by doing that.
no, but we'll ask Dr. Machila when he comes what it is. But what I'm saying is that there would have been a different treatment between the prices that were there.
We would not have allowed that.
Okay.
Absolutely.
The second question that arises again from PIC documents, which you may or may not be aware of, I'm assuming that given what it's saying is that you would be, is that there was this deal that you talk about of coming into Sagamata, that it would be something that the Sagamata deal, the PIC, the transaction team that's dealing with Sagamata, that the initial offer, which is the one you've referred to yesterday of exiting the independent media investment, was conditional on the PIC's participation in the listing of Sagamata, in that the exit would be not be in the form of a cash payout, but in the form of shares in Sagamata. So therefore, it would be using PIC payments into Sagamata to pay out the independent media. And that is what has appeared before the PIC as the deal, which is what was rejected by the PIC.
Sorry, I don't think that is true. Are you referring to the offer we made to the PIC?
That is what this document is referring to.
I don't think that offer was in relation to Sagamata.
This is definitely in relation to Sagamata.
I can check with my corporate finance team. Have you got a copy of that with you?
Well, all I'm raising is the documentation that I have, which is records of what was tabled at the investment committee of the PIC.
I don't think, if I may, with respect, through you, Commissioner, I don't think that offer has got anything to do with Sagamata.
But that's fine. That's your response to the question, which is what I'm looking for. Yeah, because I'm saying I'm going...
So I can also check that with my corporate finance team, who put the offer together, and I'll get to the details of it, and happy to come back to you with the details. I think
that's what we're trying to get you, is exactly what was on the table, but this is what, when you say that the PIC, earlier in your statement, you said the PIC accepted it but did not progress it. The reason for rejecting it was this tying to the Sagamata, as I understand from the PIC documents.
Commissioner, it's the first time we've heard this response from the PIC. And it's really, I don't understand why. We gave this offer many months ago. And if that is the concern, according to what you've just said from the investment committee of the PIC, was it not responsible for the PIC to come back to the corporate finance team and tell us that that is their concern? Because you're dealing...
I can't answer what they would have done to you. I'm going by what is presented here, which is the evidence that we are considering. You've responded to that, which is what we're trying to get a response to. Obviously, if you have other information on that, that would be fine. But as I'm saying, this is what I have here, and I just want to see if I can...
In the meantime, Dr. Surve, if you're able to verify with your team, not now, you can do that and give the report to Advocate Libber.
Mr. Commissioner, to speed things up, we have that, and we will provide that copies to Dr. Surve and his team.
And just to indicate, the resolution taken by that committee was the offer to exit in INMSA and SIM investments should be separate from the offer to acquire a stake in Sagamata, and the PIC's exit from INMSA should not be conditional upon the PIC's participation in the listing of Sagamata. So clearly that was the matter before where you can reply in terms of what the accuracy of that is, but that's what I'm saying appeared before the PIC committee considering the matter. Yeah?
Just to make the point to you, Commissioner, we have no idea what the PIC investment committee decision-making is, because right up to now, we have not received any formal communication from the PIC. We have only received through the corporate finance team and through the head of the private equity section of the PIC, Mr. Mervyn Miller and Ms. Ria, forgotten Ria's surname now, to our corporate finance team. They've only indicated the first verbal communication to us was that the transaction was approved by the investment committee of the PIC, and subsequent to that, our legal team, their legal team, went through all of the details. They asked us to submit a signed offer for the acquisition, which included a cash payment up front of, I think, within the 3 months of 150 million or something immediately. We did all of that, and then we heard absolutely nothing until last week when one of the PIC people, because I think Mr. Miller has left, one of the PIC people called Mr. Hove from our side and indicated that the investment committee has changed, but there's a strong political influence and they no longer want to do the transaction for political reasons. So that is really the only information we have. We have no insight into if there were any other concerns, what are the issues, and we could have dealt with that, if we had been informed about it.
That's fine. That is, sorry, go on. That's fine. That is your response to it. But just to reiterate, the concerns that we as a commission have from the documents before us is arising about these linkages and the question of a share price that would be public and a share price that would be a side deal, because those are obviously things that would be of great concern to any questions about the integrity and the functioning of the PIC. So that's really where we are coming from on the issue. You can provide the response as required in that regard. I don't know if you've got any questions there, or yeah?
Yes, I've got 3 questions on Sagarmatha. Yeah. During the time that you were sort of raising that 4.3 billion for IO, you were busy raising money too from the PIC, in late December, late 2017. So you got 4.3 and you were seeking another 4.5, which is 8.5 billion rands within those particular months. That like close to 9 billion rands, in 6 months, within 6 to 12 months. And when this was presented here, people were thinking the optics were not looking right, getting so much money from the PIC at such a short time. And many people don't even get to put a proposal to the PIC, but you seem to be getting the money. Do you want to comment on that?
Yes, I thank you for this opportunity through you, Commissioner. So the way our group operates is that we have more than 200 investments. We have different sectors of investments. We have different investment teams. The IO listing was led by AEI Corporate Finance and its executive team and the executives of IO. The Sagarmatha listing was led by, today, who's the CEO of the Canadian Development Bank, or called FinDev Bank Canada, appointed by Prime Minister Pierre Trudeau, Paul Lamontagne, and the team at Sagarmatha. So, and then simultaneously, just to make the point, is that we had different teams that were doing capital raisings offshore. Just recently, and I'm bound by confidentiality, for instance, we met one of the world's largest technology investment funds. Not going to mention the amount, but let's just say one of the world's largest. Our team spent about 3 weeks with them. We passed all the due diligence phases for that investment fund. They're the biggest investor in all the major tech companies in the world today. And we're at, of course, it hasn't helped. The IO negative publicity and the PIC negative publicity for our group hasn't helped us in terms of these international investors, which is quite sad because we're looking at an investment of $1 billion into our technology companies. A lot of the people, including very prominent global families, global investment houses, have now told us, regrettably after the Sagarmatha listing was pulled off the JSE, They no longer have the confidence to invest in South Africa on the JSE, even though I've tried to convince them otherwise. And they will wait for us to go to New York and possibly Hong Kong, and then they will participate in the listing of those entities. And the capitalization that you're talking about is about $5 billion. So simultaneously in our group, so just to give you a sense of it, for instance, in the mining sector, we have a different corporate finance team that's involved in vanadium, copper, precious metals, etc. They're responsible for capital raising in their sector. The asset management business responsible. So the group operates, and I said earlier, too much credit is given to me. I really am not the person that is responsible. So the thing that I've done successfully in our group is to decentralize decision making and appoint highly competent executives and boards across all of these sectors. So yes, to answer the question, things do happen in parallel. And yes, the optics may not look like, I agree with you, the optics may not look good, but we have a timetable that we set for the New York listing for Sagamata. I was very excited by that timetable because we wanted to go to New York 6 to 9 months, and we had met with the New York Stock Exchange. The Hong Kong Stock Exchange, in fact, changed their rules. They told us when we visited that, I think it was, they lost Alibaba to New York. They would like Sagamata to come to Hong Kong, but they were changing their rules in February 2018, which they did, by the way.
No, it's fine. I think it's the PIC which must manage the optics then, Yeah. The next question is on the valuation of Sagamata, but I don't want us to go into the technical details and all that, but I just want to ask one question there. You mentioned that you got platforms, and we call them multi-sided platform or double-sided platforms. When you look at Ubers and Lyft, which you mentioned, don't you think those could be valued that way, the way you tried to value Sagamata? Mainly because these are super apps, what people call super apps, that they got growing customer bases. Even though they're making losses, they are adding customers at a rapid rate, and at some point in time with the audience, they can monetize it. So looking at the companies you got there in Sagamata, like Loot and the others, they've even reached that super app status like Ubers and all that. I mean, you look at the competition, Loot competes with Take a Lot. In digital advertising, you're competing with Facebook and Google. So, I mean, the companies which you are showing there, don't you think they've even reached that super app status for you to value Sagamata at 45 billion? I mean, at 39 rands a share, you are valuing this company at 45 billion rands.
Through you, Commissioner, I'm so glad you've asked me that question.
Please, yeah. Brief.
I'm going to try and be brief because this is my expertise, to be honest. So if you look at a graph of unicorns or decacorns, which is MSPs, and you rank them according to centiles, if you take 25% centiles and then 25 to 75 and 75 and above, you'll find that any company valued below $5 billion in the capital markets of the US and Asia today is in fact very small. So if you take ByteDance from China, it's got the app TikTok. It's valued at $75 billion and it's lost $1 billion. Uber loses $400 million a quarter. I sat next to Dara in Davos 2 years ago. I actually met the founder of Uber, Travis, at DLD in Germany 4 years ago, who offered me shares in Uber at a valuation of $4 billion. Uber will list somewhere between $100 and $120 billion with a loss of $12 billion. And so, a loss of $11 billion. So there's a Harvard Business Review article, because I don't want to take the Commission's time. I'd like to send that to the Commission, if I may, first of all.
Please do.
Which looks at the valuation of MSPs. I'd also like to send to the Commission the works of Professor Damodaran, who is the guru in the sector in the US capital markets, who looks at these valuations of MSPs. You know, he did a study on Amazon in 2014, October, when he looked at Amazon at a value and he asked different entities to value Amazon, with the projection of Amazon's value today, at the time he valued Amazon, different people valued Amazon between $275 to $350. Of course, now Amazon is valued at I don't see the latest number, $2,000, right? Giving it a market capitalization of $1 trillion. Amazon lost, in its first 15 years, it didn't make a profit. So the key thing about all of this, with respect, it's not technology. Technology is very easy to replicate. If you look at mobility companies, you'll, for instance, have Uber, Lyft, Didi Chang, and many others. What you need to look at is the cost of capital. So US capital markets have, so cost of capital equals the valuation of a company. So the reason why Elon Musk isn't in South Africa today, because the markets wouldn't understand Elon Musk. The reason why Shuttleworth isn't here, the markets wouldn't understand him. In the US capital markets, the cost of capital allows you to compete and to grow market share at the expense of profitability. So you end up with huge losses, but your market, so Snap listed, and the other one that Lyft will list now, so they all lose enormous amount of money. But the economic theory of MSP companies, which makes up the top 10 companies in the world today, it's very important to understand that the capital markets have gone in the direction, is that as your platform has more users, then the marginal cost of production heads towards zero. In other words, when you establish your platform, it costs you a lot of money, and to buy market share costs a lot of money, and that's the losses that you will have. And that's loss of what Sagamata will have. Similarly, if we take loot into Africa, for instance, yes, of course we lose money, but the value of your company goes up all the time. And then you place your stock, and this is the modeling. It happened with Tencent. You know, when Koos Becker, and I give him tremendous credit, when he acquired Tencent, Richard Lee, the richest family in Hong Kong, owned Tencent along with Pony Ma. And at that time, when he invested $5 million in Tencent, and he sold it for $30 million, he thought he was doing well.
All right, thanks. Follow-up question on that. The local market seems not to understand venture capital. I think you mentioned it. Don't you think with Sagamata you could have done better by not using the PIC money in a listed vehicle, but go to Silicon Valley to raise money? Because you see, the PIC in terms of listed investments is not really structured to supply venture capital, especially given that your investments were at the early stages. You know, they were not Uber yet, they were not Lyft yet, because, you know, those are quite advanced. Don't you think, given the fact that the market here seems not to understand venture capital, that you put too much risk on the PIC's money in something that they don't really invest in, rather than go to Silicon Valley for people who understand this kind of companies?
Through you, Mr. Commissioner. That's a very complicated question. I can tell you for a number of reasons. The first is that the PIC, by the same token, the PIC's biggest investment and its biggest risk, by the way, is Naspers. If the Chinese government decides tomorrow morning to stop gaming with young children, Naspers collapses, Tencent collapses. So whichever way you look at it, they are heavily weighted in one share in the MSP space. Sagamata is a great, and that's probably what the PIC executives saw. Sagamata is a great opportunity for the PIC to diversify their risk. First of all, to come in at the basement level. Secondly, it is an African company wanting to control and own the data for Africans. So Africans can be skilled up in the MSP space, and the economics of the space is for Africans itself. So I think what the PIC saw is exactly what I saw. If the capital, and yes, we did raise capital outside in the subsidiaries of Sagamata, by the way, we did raise capital, and Sekonjalo itself used its dividend flow and its investment. That is the confidence I had to invest back into all of these businesses. So the point I'm making, this is the best opportunity for the PIC to have made a tremendous amount of money, but more than that, to back an African Amazon, Alibaba, Reuters, Bloomberg, because that's what we need to do as Africans. We need to own this technology space ourselves. It is so important. We cannot allow all our data, all our economic activity, all of this to be taken by companies from other countries, because if we don't do that as Africans, we don't own the economy of the future.
Thank you. Thanks. Thank you. The Sagamat, I think we can go.
Thank you. I'd like to move to the independent media and to just get a picture of what the actual current circumstance is. If I understand this correctly, in 2013, the INM sold its investment in IMSA to SIM, right? And the PI supported the transaction with a total of, I'm using round figures, 1.3 billion. There was an additional sale of 397, which paid the PIC back, and therefore the amount outstanding at that time was 888 million, round figures, in 2013. We come to an exposure to independent medias today. Well, being a few months ago, this would be as at the end of August 2018. And the indication there is that the amount owing by independent medias to the PIC is a total of, let me just get to my document here, paragraph 7, paragraph 10, is a total of 1.35 billion, and that has not been paid, and that would be, so there's a further 6 months of monies owed to the PIC, which resulted in Dr. Machila writing to you on the 27th of August 2018, I'm sure you recollect that letter, which says a letter of default, the loan agreement entered into by the GEPF, represented by the PIC, and independent news media. And paragraph 3 therein says the borough is in default as provided in terms of clause 17(1) of the agreement, in that the borough has not paid on the due date any amount payable pursuant to the finance document. And in paragraph 4 goes on to say the amount outstanding is 91.5 million, and interest that has accrued is 61.5 million, which is a total of 153 million. A further 2% default interest shall accrue. The question that I'm asking, has this been paid in full? What is the amount owed by independent medias to the PIC?
So it is a matter of public record that the PIC invested about 850 million, which is both equity and debt. The component that you're talking about is the interest on top of that, which is where you get to the 1.3 billion, I think. Alongside of that, there is the investment from Interacom, the Chinese, that put in R1 billion at the same time, and investment from the Second Jala Consortium that put in 150 million, and a further investment from the Second Jala Group at great risk to itself that put in about another 300 million. Now, until recently, the interest payments to the Chinese had to be made because that was the structure of the transactions. The PIC's risk was substantially reduced from the initial investment that they were going to make, quite substantially, and they agreed that the China Development Bank and CCTV would in fact get the interest. But the facts are that without the support of Second Jala, independent media is not in a position to repay the loan. That is a fact, and that is something which is not unusual in the context of the legacy print media companies out there. Of course, that was exacerbated because at the time of doing the transaction, there were a number of factors to consider. The first was that as the largest black-owned media house, we believe that with 30% of market share, we would at least go from 11% to at least 25% of government advertising. That didn't happen because the Guptas took all the government advertising along with SABC. The second thing was that when we acquired this business, the Irish had signed long-term contracts with printing, contracts with Caxton Publishing, which were onerous to independent media, Those contracts have only expired now. The third thing is that TSO Blackstar launched the Times, where they lost 1.1 billion.
Yeah, but I
to
want
compete.
to curtail you there, because my question here is not the reasoning for it. I'm looking at the PIC exposures, and according to this, obviously it would be greater now because the balance as at the end of September 2018 was 1.351 billion. And the question is this being serviced or not being serviced? And if it's not being serviced, that's the answer. This
The answer
is an exposure of the PIC.
it's not being serviced. It is exposure of the PIC. It's a matter of public knowledge. Part of that amount includes the equity investment of the PIC. And I again reiterate, the only entity that is in fact funding independent media, if Sekonjalo decides tomorrow morning not to fund independent media, the PIC suffers because they're an equity holder and they've got the debt. We are funding the business against great risk to ourselves. It is for that reason, through you, Commissioner, that my colleagues and I put together an offer to the PIC, which effectively led to their capital portion being repaid. I think it was a very good offer. And we were surprised to hear in the media that the GPF said they had written off the PIC loan. That was the first time we heard about it. And when that happened, again, the media went and slammed us for all of this, and we didn't think that was good faith. And my colleagues and I said, well, maybe we should withdraw our offer. We should no longer keep our offer, because if the GPF goes public and the PIC goes public, and the chairman of the PIC makes public statements about independent media, completely disregarding our offer, well, in that case, it doesn't seem like they're interested in us, And when I say us, this is important to understand, if I may, make this one critical point. Over and above the 150 million and the 300 million that we have put in to help the business on a monthly basis over time, we have no exposure to independent media. I took it upon myself to give huge exposure to the extent of 2.5 to 2.8 billion to independent media by going to put offers into both the PIC and the Chinese. And that is a fact. But I must tell you, sitting here today, looking at the conduct of the PIC, looking at the conduct of the GPF, looking at the way they have treated us with complete disdain when we have asked for meetings repeatedly. Because if you really care about taxpayers' money and pensioners' money, the first thing that you would do is engage with us. Ask us, how do you deal with these issues? Let us give you the solutions to all of these issues. They point blank refuse to do this.
Sorry, just on that, for clarity, when you say the deal, is that the deal we referred to earlier about where there would be, obviously you're saying a different view, but what I read out, that it would be the question of taking a position in Sagamata which would take them out of independent media?
It's got nothing to do with Sagamata.
No, I'm just saying what I read to you,
my
is that the same deal that we're talking about?
No, I don't think so. My understanding from the offer, and
Can I ask you then, if you can, because of our time constraints, provide information to the advocate that this is the deal that you have on the table offered to the PIC in relation to independent media? Okay, because then we know which one we're talking about. But as things stand, this is at 6 months ago, this is what the amount was, with an additional 2% interest accrual on that. It is obviously much bigger. So there is an outstanding balance owed to the PIC of roughly 1.5 billion rand, I would assume now.
It's a matter of public record.
Yeah.
Investments go well and some don't go well, and market conditions change.
I've got two questions on the independent media. Looking at the performance, of the company, the forecast which had happened, which had been provided to the PIC when the deal was done, haven't happened as it has been with other media companies. I just wanted to know, just in terms of the future, and look, we are worried about job losses, across the media space and all that. But looking at the future in the next 3 to 5 years, what's going to happen to this company, to independent media?
Through you, Commissioner, this is what gives me sleepless nights. I have to balance the need to keep people employed with a very difficult media environment, with advertising shifting and moving, with circulations falling, and this is for all media companies, Media 24, Novus, TISO, Blackstar, Caxton, all of them in South Africa and internationally have gone through all of this. I am busy working on a strategy with my team because the one company I think is of such importance socially in our country to provide a narrative, an alternative point of view. You know, we've championed the dignity for women, the dignity campaigns for the homeless, we've championed the Stop Racism campaigns, and we have great people working within that company and great brands, and it gives me sleepless nights. And that is why I've taken my own money and invested into this company on a month-to-month basis to keep people employed and to keep the business going. I wanted to engage the PIC and the Chinese on a recapitalization of independent media. Unfortunately, for whatever reason, the PIC has refused to engage us. Now, I don't know the reasons for that. And I think the responsible thing as South Africans, as you do with most companies, you recapitalize them and you say, look, will you put in a certain amount of money? Will we put in a certain amount of money? Will we take the risk? Will you take the risk? Or we have to do the most difficult thing ever, which is retrench half the people. And I really can't do that right now. I mean, I find it difficult to do that because it's job losses, it's people's families, and it's, you know, maybe I'm not tough enough to do that kind of thing, and maybe my colleagues have to look at it. But it's the kind of discussion I need to have with our shareholders, which includes the PIC, which includes the consortium members, which includes the Chinese. I cannot have those discussions until such time as the PIC sits with me, whoever at the PIC, and we have a discussion around these critical issues. The problem is that the executives at the PIC, in this particular portfolio, were responsible for this have left. And I understand that the chairman of the PIC is hostile to myself, and I don't know why. And he doesn't want to meet, and we've requested to the acting CEO formally in writing for these meetings. They have not responded to us at all. So it really, this gives me sleepless nights, you know, because it's so important to our country to have this media house exist. Because the worst thing that could happen is that there could be attempts by other parties to surreptitiously acquire this business and collapse it, and that, you know, it's not good for democracy if you don't have diversity of media opinions.
Thank you. Thanks. Thank you. Then the second question is, you know that media companies, you know, survive because they are impartial, independent, and please, let's answer this. There have been major allegations that you are tampering, you sort of interfere in the editorial policies of your media companies, and you know, maybe today you can give us the answer, because it will affect the business that the PIC has funded.
Thank you. I'm really glad. I can only speak to the facts. So the facts are that I can give you copies of letters which I've written to all of the editors in the group in terms of how and what we do. And the principles of what we do is, first of all, be accurate. Secondly, provide both sides of the story. Don't take sides. Be truthful. And that is the policy of our company. And that is in writing. It's also in writing in terms of the contracts of all of our key editors and executives. I'm happy to provide you with all of those letters, especially during the election time. I go to great lengths to write and to speak to the editors about not taking sides. It is precisely because I've not taken sides, firstly, in the ANC factional battles, secondly, politically, that I've come under attack. People want me to take sides. They want independent media to take sides. And I make the point repeatedly, I don't do the news, my editors do the news. In fact, the editors can tell you themselves. You're welcome to ask them to come here. They understand that they have the responsibility, and they must make sure that our credibility through you, Commissioner, is based on our objectivity. The day that we no longer have objectivity, our credibility is gone. And it is a commercial issue for us. And
the business is gone. I mean,
yeah, absolutely. And for that reason, I emphasize, even recently, I've emphasized to my colleagues at independent media, don't get tempted into these ANC factional battles. Let the Sunday Times and Daily Maverick and others do what they want to do, Business Day. You just remain true to the facts. And that is the policy that I've instituted. It is not a policy that's made me popular.
And is that the same thing with your tech platforms like Twitter, Facebook, and all that?
Oh, totally, absolutely.
You have the same policy?
Totally, across the group, because it's the credibility of our group. And the fact is that, if you look at our circulation, if you take, for example, relatively to our competitors, our circulation has come down, but relative to our competitors, not as much as them. Because the public isn't buying this factionism. It's not buying the bias and propaganda. They're wanting to see objectivity. So independent media is in fact the most objective media house in the country today. But that comes at a price, because as one minister said to me at the function of someone who got his PhD, and I was confronted by that minister, he said to me, we're very disappointed with you because you don't take sides, because you're not on our side. And my response was, but we cannot be on anybody's side. In the interest of our democracy in this country, another minister called me 3 months ago and threatened me at 10 p.m. in the evening. He said, your journalists have called me about bank statements and things, etc., and those journalists are doing the bidding of certain people. And I said, well, you know what, I'm not the journalist. I can put you in touch with the editors. I'm happy to do that. So the point is, we have to remain objective. That is my policy, because the survival of this group is based on our credibility and objectivity.
Thanks. And yeah, I think then we'll come to the IO.
Yeah, can I just ask one question? In paragraph 45 of the statement, you refer to, it's a sort of a response to the rejection of the offer that was made in the previous paragraph, made to the PIC, that is. Have you got it? Yeah. And in the last sentence of paragraph 45, you say this decision by the PIC is once more indicative of its investment decision being driven by political motives as opposed to the genuine interests of its investors. What did you mean by that, driven by political motives?
Through you, Mr. Commissioner, if I may, and this may be a little bit controversial and probably not what my counsel would advise me, but I was informed by members of the NEC of the ANC that at the January the 8th statement at a breakfast, the chairman of the PIC, Mondli Gungubeli, mentioned to them that he will crush independent media, he will crush IO, and he will crush Sekunjalo, and that he will not allow any decision at the PIC to favor Sekunjalo. He will use taxpayers' money to come after us, and that's what he said to NEC members of the ANC. I'm sure some of them are advocates that he mentioned this to. I'm sure that they are happy to come and testify of their own accord, but I don't want to betray their confidence. But he has not only made those statements there, he's made those statements to numerous other places, certainly within the ANC circles. He's told people that he's acting under instruction because independent doesn't toe the line, and that they'll crush independent media. And I can only assume that when we put a commercial proposition to the PIC, which is agreed upon according to the feedback they gave us, and then the decision changes, and when we're told that decision is based politically, that's very sad, and that's what is actually meant.
So the inference that one can draw from that is that you hold the view that the chairperson of the board might have interfered so that this decision could be reached.
If I believe what I've been told by what I call people I respect that I've known for decades during the years of the struggle that are in the ANC that have told me this, and I believe them. Yes, I believe, and if I look at the conduct and if I look at the statements being made, if I look at what's happening with IO, it doesn't make any sense to me at all because it's an investment they've put into. Yes, I'm saddened by it because it's sad. I wish it wasn't the case, and it's very sad. Yeah.
Thank you.
Mr. Commissioner, may I, with your leave, just put something on record that will help in the discussion about the proposed settlement of the independent media matter. I read from an affidavit from an official of the PIC which will come and testify, and then perhaps Dr. Survé can comment on that. It's a statement by Mercy Leroque. She says, I further confirm that on the 23rd of August 2018, I was appointed to be the legal resource to assist on the transaction. This is the settlement. The first task was to assist in reviewing a default letter. I was then later instructed to draft a payment agreement which would facilitate settlement terms. Once the payment agreement was settled internally, same was sent out to independent media. Independent media furnished us with their comments on the draft of the agreement. We then noted that the terms inserted on the draft were different from what was approved by the PIC committee. We thus requested a conference call with independent media for clarity. On 10 December 2018, I, together with the investment team, was on a conference call with Mr. Tagutswa Ove concerning the settlement on the independent media deal. From our telephonic conversation with Mr. Hove, I got the impression that Mr. Hove stated that he had mentioned the deal to CEO Dr. Machilla. This aspect was never explored in detail in our telephonic conversation, but was clear on the call was that the parties were not in agreement on the terms of the settlement. So that is the situation at present.
Mr. Commissioner, through you, you are more than welcome to call Mr. Hove to give his side of the story, because he was the individual that led the negotiations in terms of the settlement offer. And I think he may have a completely different view to that letter. But he is best placed to actually provide the necessary facts that pertain to this matter. Thank you.
I suppose you wouldn't be able to say anything, of course, in respect of your inference that the chairperson of the PIC board might have interfered in this matter. You wouldn't be able to do that.
You know, Mr. Commissioner, I can keep you here the whole day from the things that I hear.
I wouldn't want to be here the whole day.
And neither, I have to fly back to Cape Town, and it's sad. All I can say, you know, when people mix politics with business, it's very sad. When people use state institutions, and I'm referring to SIPC now, it is sad. I mean, I just heard this morning that an instruction to SIPC came from a minister.
Okay, but let's not get into that.
In the time available, because we are running out of time, and I would hope that we could conclude this without having you to come back next week, I'd like to just raise some issues around BT and IO. And a lot has already been done and said around it, so I will try to keep it fairly brief. The first question is around the question of BT and your pre-listing statement. In your pre-listing statement, you list a whole number of the alliance operations transfer and the competitive advantage that BT would give you. That was in your pre-listing statement, but it did not materialize. You corrected that through a SENS announcement, or how was that dealt with?
The BT acquisition did not materialize, but the BT strategic alliance agreement did, and that was the benefits to IO. So there are two distinct and material, if you call it relationships with BT. One is the alliance agreement, which was in fact concluded and is in operation today. And it is what is driving the profitability of IO. So the businesses of BT and the employees of BT that came across, the only difference is the acquisition did not take place, but the capital for the acquisition, which is 1 billion, remains in IO.
And it's that 1 billion that you're asking, or that is available for the PIC to you're selling the BT to the PIC?
Not at all. As part of the 4.3 billion capital raise, 1 billion of that was allocated for the acquisition of the BT stake.
Into IO?
Into IO from AEI, subject to a valuation, because it's a related party. So
Sure.
Only the PIC can determine the value and determine whether they would vote for it.
But in essence, that PIC money would be used to pay for that movement from one company to another of that BT transaction at 1 billion rand, of the 4.3 billion raised. Has that been done or not yet done?
No, it's not been done. The IO acquisition of BT did not take place, as is well documented.
Okay. So that is an outstanding matter. The question there, and obviously this does relate to you in terms of the pressure points. A lot of the discussion has been about the timelines for this listing. And of concern to the Commission is that approval was given without due process in the PIC, and that there was the question of an inability to change the listing date. I'm sure you're aware of all of those issues. And was there any interaction between yourself and Dr. Machila about the challenges being made to the PIC, given that there was not due process?
I'm not aware of the challenges that were made to the PIC. As far as I am informed by our AEI corporate finance team, they had started this process months before with the JSC. They had engaged the PIC timeously in terms of this kind of listing. And the pressure was to try and conclude the Sasol Alliance agreement and to capitalize the business so that they could end up where they are today. So I'm not aware of what's happening at the PIC.
Okay. In terms of the IO money, at this point in time, according to a note that I have, there have been a number of investments that have taken place, a large number of that into asset management as distinct from IT.
So if I look at the balance sheet of yesterday, you'll see that the current assets of IO the assets of IO 5.2 billion, of which 4.4 billion is in current assets, and a little bit more, 4.6 billion is in current assets, another 550 million is in fixed assets. So these monies, what corporates do, and this is quite normal, is that you diversify. The money is owned by the company itself, but you put it into banks, you put it in high-yield bonds, asset management companies, etc. All of this belongs to the company. It doesn't belong to anyone else. So it's part of your risk stratification of Treasury, and we have a Treasury function within our group within different areas. There's nothing abnormal about that. As long as you get your return and you minimize the risk of where you put the money. That's important.
I understand that, and that is a specific question of at this point in time, which would obviously from the current may change, but at this point in time, it was 3.6 billion that were in financial institutions that was part of the funding. I'm asking for the investments, given that this is an IO is focused on as an IT company. A lot of the purchases seem to be asset managements, 400
no,
million.
That's not correct. All of the purchases are in technology and asset management companies. The only one which is the fintech fund with Vunani Capital to bring in black entrepreneurs into the ICT space. And it's almost like delegating that, and that's a small amount of money relative to the total capitalization.
So three laws asset management, which is 470 million, Oasis asset management, 400.
Three laws, that mandate was terminated, and that money is back with IO because of the media hype. I advised the CEO of Three Laws that he must please repay that money back to IO, even though it's IO's money. It was in the Three Laws account, and that's been repaid along with the interest.
And Oasis Asset Management, 400 million?
No, there's a mandate which, you cannot, so they have those funds, and that's okay. That's a highly reputable asset management company. And that mandate, I'm not sure when it expires, but from Three Laws' side, because it's a related party, fully disclosed in the financials of the JSE in August 2018, financials, I instructed the CEO of Three Laws to please terminate the mandate because I didn't want the nonsense that the Sunday Times is running, out there to continue, because that's just complete nonsense.
I would like to just briefly look at the appointment of your new board of IO, because that is something that was a question of independent.
Yes.
And you have appointed, or has been appointed, is Advocate Ramatlodi, Advocate Nkoki, Dennis George, and Silo Rasetaba.
Yes.
A couple of questions in terms of their independence. Has any of them ever borrowed any money from any and also been supported in any financial dealings by any of the Sekunjalo group?
I don't recall any of them having. I think Advocate Mgoki many years ago, and I'm talking about maybe 18, 20 years ago, was involved with the Second Jala Group, and there may have been interactions at that point in time. I don't think anyone else over there. I'm not aware of that, but I can check that for you. But just to make the point, those appointments were made by the PIC. They were not
No,
made by us.
I understand that.
Yeah.
I'm just saying that given that you want an independent board, I'm
Oh,
asking
yes.
whether there were any related or interactions with those
I don't-
board
I
members.
don't-
They
I
are
c- I can
completely
check that.
independent, non-exec.
I can check that for you through
Yeah.
you, Commissioner, with the chairman of IO. I can check to
I
see
think
whether
that would
there's,
be
because
helpful.
what they have to do as is, which regrettably Mr. Hardy and Mr. Ndwela didn't want to do, was to sign a conflict of interest policy and declare all interest, and they refused to do that. And every board that we have in our group, every single director has to do that up front. You have to indicate whether there's a conflicts, related party, and all of those kind of things.
And in the remaining board members, is there anyone who are family or related in terms of the two independent non-execs that would have any links to you, which is Mrs. Masia and Mr. Ahmad? Again, in
Mr.
terms of
Ahmad
independence?
Mr. Ahmad is related to me, and it's not unusual because
No, it's not about, it's just a question of whether they're independent
Mr.
or
Ahmad is
non-independent.
related. Ahmad is related.
And
Ms.
therefore it's
Masia
not-
is independent, definitely. She's a world-class chartered accountant with a master's, Rosemary Masia.
Yeah, so it's just a question of classification within your board of how many are independent, how
Ahmad
many are
is-
non-independent.
So we have the minority of the board positions. Most of the positions are independent. And that in a way goes against us. But I'm okay with that because it just strengthens the governance of the company. And that's a good thing.
I've got no-
Perhaps for the record, Mr. Commissioner, Mrs. Masia, is she not the deputy chairperson of Sagamata?
She was, but she's independent. She's not, but you see, there's no reason why she can't be appointed to other boards. She's not related, she's completely independent, and she's a black woman with a, I hate to say it, black woman, I apologize for that once again,
You don't have to apologize for indicating what you're saying. The difference yesterday was something very different.
Thank
So
you.
please do not behave in
Thank
that
you. I was
manner.
thank you for that, and I really appreciate that through you, Commissioner. Ms. Rosemary Masia is a black woman with outstanding degrees in accounting and is a huge asset to the boards of our company. She's a woman of high integrity and a real asset to us, and I'm really delighted that she could sit on our boards. Yeah. Thank you.
Quick one. I've got about 4 or 5 questions here, quick ones now. Yeah. But I need to return
I don't want to
the-
come back, Simon, answer
Yeah,
very quickly.
definitely, yeah. I want to return to the point I asked about sort of the editorial issues, you know, within your company that people are asking is it independent? Is the independent? And I'm just trying to put it quickly, you know. I got friends who are not buying the Star, the Independent on Sunday, and they say they don't trust the paper anymore, you know.
You know, all of these papers are run by editors, and every editor has their own point of view. The important thing from a policy point of view.
Still buy the paper, but
Yeah, I mean, thank you, still buying the paper. I appreciate that to you, Commissioner. The point is, and I encourage everyone to buy the independent media group's papers. The point I'm making is that we can only set policy. The policy is you have to be accurate, you have to be fair, you have to be truthful, you must give the right of reply, and you must not take sides. But we can't police people. You know, once you set the policy and once you've appointed your editors, the Sunday Independent editor, Zingisa, is a fantastic woman. I think she's a woman of great integrity. Sometimes you have columnists who write in your papers that have a particular point of view, that take a particular side. You may not agree with them. Some people assume that everything written in our titles, our 20 news, were written by me. I mean, if I'm lucky, I get to read 1 or 2 of our titles a day, and online maybe look at the headlines. It's very difficult. The media business is a very difficult business, you know, and the risk is that people must not become partisan. My view is our democracy can only deepen and be enriched if you give the diversity. So in fact, if you look at it, independent media was the DA mouthpiece. Its titles were all DA supporting from the time I bought it. And even today, we give the DA significant, what do you call this, coverage, which is good. We give the EFF coverage, which is good. We give the ANC coverage. And people have to accept that is our role. Everybody must be able to have. But for me, the greater thing is that we don't present people of this country as negative. We present our country in a positive light. That's important.
Thank you. And I don't know whether this question can be answered by you or somebody else. When Victor Sianek came here, he complained that Malik Sali actually treated the PIC staff with disdain or contempt because they tried to get some information, he didn't respond and all that. Can you add something on that issue?
I did, in fact, follow that up. When I saw that, I was really disappointed and very, very angry that that could have happened, and if it had happened. And I was told by Mr. Sali himself that that was not the case, that he had engagements with the easier, of course, sitting here. But I do want to say, as a matter of policy, I personally treat everybody with respect. I give them the due no matter who you are, no matter if you're a cleaner in my office, a tea lady, corporate finance person, an investor. That is the example I can set as the chairman of this group. I expect the employees of our organization to follow that example. And when you are asked questions, and I willingly came here, Advocate Lubbe, you know that. I was very happy to come here because I have nothing to hide, and it was important for me to share with you my point of view and to listen to what you have to say. And I think that's the kind of open engagement that I encourage my colleagues and the employees of the organization. I really like Victor Siani personally because I tried to explain to him the MSPs, and I really do apologize to him if any of my group executives have in any way offended him, but that's not the culture of our organization. It will never be.
When there was this IO listing, Dr. Den signed the subscription, document before he did agreements with you guys, the put option and the other things. Were you surprised by that, and did you do something about it?
No, we do not have insight into the PIC or how they operate. You learn things post the event now, in particular with this commission, and you read the transcripts or you watch the videos. But for us, we don't have insight into what the PIC does and how they do things. Honestly, I always assumed that whatever they've done is absolutely in accordance with their processes. I mean, it's not, why would we think any differently? The reality is that if I look at what's been written, I think it's Dr. Dan himself that must come and explain himself. To me, that is the sensible thing, and the questions has to be asked, because I read different things from different, if I read the transcripts of the two directors that came here, they may be different to some of the executives. I'm not an expert at any of these things, and I guess that the best person that should avail himself, and I'm sure he will, would be Dr. Dan, possibly. But I must tell you, I have enormous respect for Dr. Dan. I really do.
You got a put option, which I think goes 22 rands a share. Is that correct? On IO?
I don't know whether the put option materialized, and I definitely know there's no put option to IO because that was not in the PLS. And as far as I'm aware, there's been no public announcement in relation to it. I don't think there's any put options. Yeah. I think what's happened is that the PIC, with all the media pressure, felt they needed to reinforce their position and contacted the IO or AI people, and I don't know whether or not they have concluded. I don't think they did, personally.
I think we need to check that whether there's a signed put option or not. Yeah. Advocate? All right.
Thank you, Mr. Commissioner. It is noted. We will.
And I note that IO is purchasing maybe one or two companies from AEI or your companies, say some of your companies. So it looks like there could be some conflict of interest when the PIC has put in money and then that money is being used to buy some of your companies? I mean,
No, that's
in
not,
terms of
that's not
valuation.
possible through you, Commissioner. When you're a JSE-listed company, there are very stringent regulations, as you would know, in terms of related party transactions. All of those have to be disclosed. Any material related party transactions have to have a special resolution and be voted on by the shareholders. I'm not aware of any such acquisitions. I think you may be referring to just recently, the Saab Grintech Telecommunications acquisition. Yeah, that is not a investment that we're invested in. That's a completely new investment. But it's a joint investment by both AEI and IO for the benefit of IO. But it's not a company that belongs to us per se. It's an unrelated entity, if I may say that. I'm not aware of any other. I speak under correction, but I did read through the interim results yesterday, and I didn't see any acquisition there. But I can cross-check with the chairman of the board and ask if that is the case, but I'm not aware of anything.
Second last question from me. The work done by PSG Corporate Finance and AEI Corporate Finance, was there no duplication there? I mean, can you justify the fees there?
Look, fees is...
The amount looks
Yeah.
fine in terms of
Yeah.
the percentage
Yeah.
of the
I
transaction.
think
but
the amount
if you
overall is
could-
fine, actually, from what I see from if you reference it against other transactions, for instance, of similar size, I think the amounts look okay. I mean, we can check with the teams whether they divided up the work, with the different people did different work, and whether there was a different emphasis in terms of the PLS. I'm not involved in that at all, but I can certainly get a response to you from the AI Corporate Finance team and the IO teams. Happy to get that to Advocate Libet.
The final question from me. In terms of the 4.3 billion that the PIC has put in IO, we understand the PIC is trying to get its money back and all that, given what is happening. Is that possible? I mean, how would the PIC get its money back? Are you going to resist this? And is that possible? I mean, can the PIC get its money back? How is this going to play out in the next months?
Well, I can assure you that we have done nothing wrong, and no one has said we've done anything wrong. At all times, we've acted with integrity, professionally. Our teams have presented to the PIC. They've invested. Our duty is to all shareholders, including the PIC right now. We will utilize the funds for the purpose for which they were intended, which is to grow the businesses, to make the acquisitions, and to increase the profitability. I would like to engage the PIC. It's never helpful. This is taxpayers' money. This is pensioners' money. It's not helpful to litigate on these matters. It's much better to sit around a table, address the concerns, if any, which the PIC has. Perhaps we could strengthen the boards even further. Perhaps we could get input from the PIC. Perhaps we could agree together on the strategy and what we need to do. This is pensioners' money. I wouldn't go this litigation route. Of course, we have the company itself, and the board of the company has to exercise its rights in terms of whether it will defend its rights. And the board of the company, I have no doubt, is of the view that this is a very legitimate investment, and that they have a responsibility to all shareholders. And of course, but that's not the way to go. I think that if I may give advice to our council, it would be to engage with the PIC's council, to sit down around a table and to find a way, if there were mistakes, and whatever mistakes there were from the PIC side, I'm not saying there were, whatever anyone thinks, let's sit down, let's talk, let's understand. At the end of the day, you want to deliver value to the pensioners and the shareholders of the company, and you need to take a responsible decision. And this is about building the largest black ICT company in the country. It's about the 1,400 people, and possibly by 2 years' time, 5,000 people being employed in this company. The key thing for me, and this is the assurance I can give you as the chairman of the group, I will make sure that every cent that's in that business is utilized for the benefits of the shareholders and to grow profitability, to do acquisitions that are sensible, responsible, so that the business itself will have a value of many multiples of what the PIC invested in. That is the only thing I can do in terms of And I can do that by nominating to the board really credible South Africans with expertise and all of those things. And litigation is never good for anybody. And I really hope the PIC will engage us constructively on this.
Thank you. Just the final question is that you seem to be getting money from the PIC without the other fund managers putting money into your businesses. Why is that so? You know, people say if the other fund managers do not support your businesses, maybe these are not great businesses or whatever. But why do you think the other fund managers shun your businesses, including, by the way, black fund managers?
Well, largely speaking, I can only speculate on this. The reality is that we have funded our own businesses over the time. We have our own capital to do that. We have not gone to institutions, but we don't have the networks in certain institutions. I was about to use the word white, but let me just say that. We don't have the networks, and that is regrettable, you know, and South Africa is still regrettably polarized in that respect. And so perhaps things will change over time. But if what you do need to look at is the performance of our companies. From a profitability, balance sheet, it's remarkable that we have no debt and we are highly profitable with good cash flows. There's also a narrative that's been painted about myself through you, Commissioner, by, regrettably, the media, related primarily to independent media. Since I took over independent media. Before independent media, everything was hunky-dory. There was no issues at all. I was fine. I mean, I was building up a fantastic business, good partnerships. After independent media, everything changed. And it was as if I had no right to actually acquire, or a black business had no right to acquire a media space. And the hostility and the negativity. And so, in a way, I guess, we don't have the confidence that white institutions will invest with us because of the narratives out there. And maybe I'm too forthright in my views. Maybe I'm too much of a champion for transformation. Maybe I should not be as activist as I am, as a businessman. I don't know, but you know, it's very difficult. This is a difficult country. It's very complex. It's very complex. That's all I can say.
Yeah. Thanks for dealing with the many questions which I had and some issues which I had. Thank you very much. Thanks.
Advocate Lover, I think you mentioned that you may have some questions.
Thank you, Mr. Commissioner. Just a couple of final questions. Dr. Surve, on the date of the listing of IO, were you on the floor of the JSE?
Yes, I did visit the JSE to celebrate the listing that morning.
And Dr. Machilla, was he there?
Yes, he was there. I saw him there as well. Yes.
Did you interact with him on the listing? Did you discuss it?
The day of the listing? Yes, yeah.
Did he inform you that the PIC was not in a position to make full payment on the day of the listing?
No, I don't recall that on that day of the listing.
Did he tell you that the PIC had to sell off stock to get funds, to make funds available for the purchase of the IO shares?
No, not at all.
So, for the record, you were totally unaware of this?
I was not aware of that, yes.
Now, in your previous dealings with the PIC, surely, and as a businessman, you must know that it is almost impossible for a deal like the IO listing to be from date of origination till final sign-off and listing to be completed in less than a month.
Well, I don't think that's entirely true, because if you look at the IO listing, the engagement with the JSE would have happened at least, and the preparation a couple of months before that. It is the nature of PLSs and prospectuses, by the way, that when you're in the listed environment, and this is an issue for the PIC, as opposed to the unlisted, in the listed environment, generally you put forward your private placement documentation or your prospectuses and the key decision-making from the time of a listed company to investment is much quicker. So, for example, you may find that for the PIC to invest in Anglo-American could take them 6 hours, just as an example. So listed environment, and that may call into play, because you did say to me you're looking at the PIC, that you may have to look at IPOs going forward. Do they have to have a different timeline as opposed to companies that are already listed? And maybe it requires, as in the unlisted portfolio, a different approach to that. But this is not unusual. In fact, I think that's quite a long timeline. That's my view, of course.
Have you any personal knowledge of the processes that must be followed by the PIC when approving investment of this magnitude?
I've learnt about it, and interestingly, I've learnt about it from the Commission. Yeah. I mean, I'm assuming the way it works is that the PIC would invest based on the mandates or whatever it is. Yeah.
Were you surprised to learn in January when the board of the PIC issued a statement that officials at the PIC totally flouted all policies and procedures with this investment?
You're talking about the IO investment, of course. Look, there are 2 sides to every story. Sometimes there are 3 sides. From what I've read, the board members of the PIC who came here were saying that there was nothing wrong with the IO transaction. The head of the listed equities came here and said there's nothing wrong with it. His general manager, Lebogang Molabatsi, said there was nothing wrong with it. Mr. Sunil Vajis, who is the head of retail, came here and said there was nothing wrong with it. Even Mr. Victor Siani, by his own admission, had said that it followed the process. So I remember in one of the transcripts, one of the persons saying, I think it was one of the board members, said that this matter came to the PIC Investment Committee 15 times. So, I mean, really, what I see is very different to what... I was also surprised to learn that, you're talking about January 2019, am I right?
Yes.
Yeah. I was also surprised to learn from the transcripts here that the chairman of the PIC had instructed someone to do something, and then, according to what 2 of the directors said, this was never brought to the board in time. They never had an opportunity to look at this. So it seems like the chairman of the PIC had an agenda when he did all of this. And so my answer is, let's look at the facts, and let's look at all of the facts here, but based on the transcripts that I have read, and I haven't, admittedly, Advocate Lubber, and to you, Commissioner, I've not read everything, but what little I've read, I seem to think that this transaction, there was no issues with it. There may have been some, from what I've read, issues in terms of timing of payments and that kind of thing, but fundamentally it was all fine. There was no issues. The question you have to ask is, let's say you take all the PIC transactions over the last 5 years and examine all of them and the process pertaining to all of them. Are you going to find that all of them are perfect? Are you going to find all of them are imperfect? I don't know. But that requires a far more intensive research, due diligence. It sounds to me like the nature of what's happening is that there's a specific focus on a couple of transactions. But I hear, for instance, that transactions like MTN Nigeria was done within the space of a few days. I don't know if it's true. You hear this in the marketplace. But I'm only speculating. I do think to assist the PIC going forward, you need to separate in decision-making unlisted companies, you need to separate IPOs coming to the market, and then listed equities. And then I would divide up listed equities, not necessarily by sectors, but divide them up by size. Because by market capitalization, those companies in the top 40, those companies in the top 100 of the JSE or similar exchanges, and then have different teams. And the other thing, I don't think you must have cross-fertilization or cross of the teams. I think the teams need to be independent of each other. I mean, those are the suggestions that I can make in order to improve the investment decision-making process.
Thank you. Following up on that question Ms. Marcus raised on the 3 laws, according to the documentation, on an analysis of the documentation we did on AO annual financial statements, there was a 400 million rand reinvestment into 3 Laws post-balance sheet. Can you explain that?
Look, 3 Laws is an asset manager. It's got a Category 2 license from the FSB. It's one of the entities that IO invests its money in order to get a return. And again, from what I've read, part of the funds, it was fully disclosed in the financial statements of August 2018. So there's nothing secretive, unusual about that. But what I did, once I saw all of this hype about this, I spoke to the asset manager and I said to him, look, just terminate this mandate with IO. It's an annual mandate. Terminate it, return the funds, because people are misrepresenting this issue, and it's fine. It's okay. As a treasury function, you're always going to put funds with institutions and asset managers. There's nothing wrong with that. And the money belongs to IO. It doesn't belong to anyone else.
Can I ask you then, lastly, I've been informed that you, or through your Sekenyala group, are the owner of apartments in what I understand is a silo development in Cape Town. Is that correct?
That is correct.
And who is the owner?
Thank you for asking me that, and I'm so glad that you did, through you, Commissioner. We have numerous property investments through our different companies. One of those companies is ProDirect, and it, in fact, acquires as lots of companies. But I'm deeply offended by the Sunday Times article that even suggests for one moment that I would have taken a cent of that money. Some of those apartments were bought before then. They are rented out, those apartments. So some of them, I bought my house when I was a doctor, young doctor, in 1996 in Rondebosch. I stayed in that house for more than 2 decades. I was happy to do so. Let me just complete 1 second. And for safety and security reasons, I decided to move personally to the waterfront because of the danger to my life, and I regrettably have to have bodyguards because some people believe what's in the newspapers is what I write. Some people want to, frankly speaking, kill me because they believe that independent media is championing the black people's rights against all sorts of things. So I moved to one of the apartments, yes, and my daughter lives in another, but why can't I do that? I live a simple life. I don't have jets, I don't have Ferraris, I don't have aeroplanes and boats, and my family donates a substantial amount of our money to social impact, to Survé philanthropies, etc., all of those things, and the rest I reinvest back into my companies to create jobs and employment. So I'm deeply, deeply offended that Sunday Times, they were very clever. They had a line in there which said the funds did not come from IO, but they created the impression for the whole of South Africa, and it's unethical and disgraceful journalism when you do something like that. So yes, I'm deeply offended by that.
Can I ask you, is there any financial exposure to IO regarding these apartments?
The only exposure is that 2 of the apartments are rented to IO, and one of them is a former British American Tobacco senior executive that flew in from London, that came from London, and he needed a place, and that contract was terminated. It was an annual contract. The other one is for IO executives, but that's out of about 8 or 10 apartments. I'm not exactly sure. So that's okay. It's an arm's length transaction. But I'm deeply offended by even the suggestion that this, I'm a wealthy person. I live a simple life. And why do I not have a right to invest in property and diversify my portfolio? I mean, there's nothing wrong with that.
You say you don't own a jet or a Ferrari. Do you own a Bentley?
My car that I drive in is 8 years old. We were talking about it yesterday. And it's quite funny that my senior executives, drive in more fancier cars. And look, I choose to live simply because I want to have an example to my family and to friends and to my employees that success must not be about, material possessions. It must be about creating success to give back to society. I'm not perfect, Advocate Lover. I do make mistakes through you, Commissioner. But I try every day. I try to live a good life. I remember the people that sacrificed for this country. And every time I'm tempted to do something a little bit extravagant, I think about that.
Do you own a Bentley?
I'm sorry.
No, I don't own a Bentley.
No, I was
I've never
going to
owned a
say,
Bentley.
I was going to say, I'm not sure whether you said yes or no. Do you?
I don't own a Bentley, no. I drove a Beetle when I was a doctor for a period of 10 years, and the only thing that was remarkable about it, through you, Commissioner, is that if you sat in the passenger, all my colleagues had BMWs and Mercedes-Benzes when they were practicing. I practiced for 10 years in a community practice, and the only thing I had to warn you if you sat in the passenger seat that there was no floor, you might go through the floor. But I was happy to do that because I loved my patients. I love what I did. They didn't have to pay if they couldn't afford to. And it was a calling. And I try and live my life. I'm not perfect. I try and live my life that way. Yeah.
Thank you, Mr. Commissioner. On that lighter note, it's the end of the business for today and this week. Can I ask you then that we adjourn till Monday?
Let me make sure first whether Mr. Kassim has anything to say.
No, Mr. Commissioner.
Yes, thank you very much, Doc. Thanks for your time. We, speaking on behalf of the three of us, appreciate the fact that you came here and you came to put your side of the story before us and answered certain questions that we thought need to be answered. Thank you also for offering your officials in your companies, should the legal team want to interview them. And Mr. Lubbe, I take it that you will, particularly those officials who took part in the IO transaction and at meetings at the PIC, one or two of them that you will interview to clear up certain things that are still outstanding.
Thank you, Mr. Commissioner. We will definitely do that. And
Yes.
we're also going to interview Dr. Surve further on statements he made here about possible intervention by the chairman of the board and statements made in public about independent media. We'll have to follow that up, and we will interview Dr. Surve.
Yes, thank you. And I'm sure, Dr. Surve, you'll cooperate.
I will definitely cooperate. Hopefully I don't have to come back, and I'm happy to give Advocate Lubbe, whatever he requires by statement or meeting. Yeah. This takes up, I'm really happy and I'm here, but it takes up a lot of time. Thank you.
And that's why we appreciate your time. Right, we shall then adjourn until Monday, 10 o'clock. I'm trying to work out the date. The 8th.
It is the 8th, Mr. Commissioner.
So
It is
we'll
the 8th.
then adjourn until Monday, the 8th at 10 o'clock.